Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if Harald Hadrada became the King of England. As a bit of historical context, in 1065, King Edward the Confessor died childless. The next day, the most powerful of the earls, Harold Godwinson, was crowned as the King of England. During the start of his reign, he had two rivals, both of whom claimed the English throne. They were William the Duke of Normandy, which was a duchy in northern France at the time, and Harald Hadrada, the King of Norway. William's claim was based on an agreement with Edward that William would succeed him, while Hardrada's claim was based on an alleged agreement with Cnut the Great that he would receive England. Now, in our timeline, Godwinson and his men waited in the south for William to arrive, but after a few months, he got word that Harold and his Norse army had landed in north and took the city of York. Godwinson took his army and marched north at an incredible pace, and met the Norwegians at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. There, the English defeated the Norse in a decisive battle. During the battle, the Norwegian king Harald Hadrada was killed when an arrow pierced his neck. The Norse retreated soon after, and Godwinson got word that William landed south. So he took his army to face the Normans in battle. At the decisive Battle of Hastings, the Normans defeated the English after a hard-fought battle. Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king, was killed after an arrow struck his eye. William then marched north and consolidated his power, and in October of 1066 he was crowned as the King of England, starting Norman rule in England. William would go on to become William the Conqueror, and his conquest would change English and world history forever. But what this never happened? Today we will answer that question, but before starting the video, I'd greatly appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel, as it would help me create more alternate history scenarios just like this. But without any further ado, let's start the scenario. Our story would begin in 1066. Godwinson and his army would be waiting in the south for the Normans to arrive. Here, due to stronger winds, the Normans would land earlier than they did in our timeline. At the same time, Hardrada would land in the north and take York. Godwinson would decide to face the Normans first, and after a hard-fought battle, the English defeat the Normans. In the battle, William would fall from his horse and perish, thereby forcing the Normans to return to Normandy. The exhausted English would then move north to meet the Norse in battle, where the Norse would defeat the English at a decisive battle. Harold Godwinson would meet his end when a Norse axe pierces his skull, thereby ending Anglo-Saxon rule and starting Norse rule. Harald Hardrada would then march south and consolidate his power, and by the end of 1067, he would be crowned as the King of England. The immediate effects this would have would be that England and Norway would be united under a single monarch, with Harald proclaiming himself as the successor of Cnut the Great. In our timeline, the Normans saw the English as an inferior culture and tried making them more Norman. Anglo-Saxon nobles were removed and replaced with Norman ones, and French became the language of the elites and the king for almost 300 years. It also had a huge impact on the English language and culture, making both of them less Germanic and more French, forming the English language we know of today. The Normans also introduced feudalism to England and centralized power, making England one of the most wealthiest states in Europe. The Normans were also subject to the French king, which started the eternal Anglo-French rivalry, with a later branch of the Normans, the Angevins, almost conquering France. But here, none of that would happen. Due to the Normans not conquering England, the Anglo-French rivalry would never happen. Instead, like before the Norman conquest, England would be considered a part of Scandinavia, with its policy, trade, and economics being tied to the region. This would also affect the culture of England, with the Norwegians, unlike the Normans, seeing England as a superior culture to be emulated rather than oppressed. The English language would gradually change and have Norwegian words, making the language more Germanic than before. And the Norwegians probably won't replace the Anglo-Saxon nobles like the Normans did, resulting in the Anglo-Saxon culture surviving and having some Norse influence. Harald Hardrada had a rivalry with Magnus, the King of Denmark, but because of his old age, he would probably die in a few years. After his death, his realms would get partitioned, with his son Olaf receiving England. In our timeline, he was a very peaceful king, and here he would do the same, rebuilding England and leading it to prosperity. In Norway, his brother Magnus would soon die childless, and after a few years, he would become the king of both England and Norway. After his death, his son Magnus Barefoot would become the king of both kingdoms. He was a warrior king who would conquer the Kingdom of the Isles and the Kingdom of Dublin, as that was something he was doing in our timeline. After his death, his son Sigurd would take over both crowns, leading England and Norway into a golden age. He would also build good relations with Scotland by marrying a daughter of the Scottish king. By the end of the 1200s, England, Scotland, and Norway would be under a personal union. The main rival of this new England would be Denmark, with Anglo-Norway fighting numerous wars with the Danes, and the Hanseatic League, who they would harass for loot in the North and Baltic seas. By the 1400s, the conflicts with Denmark would exhaust both sides, with the Swedes joining in and taking Danish lands in Sweden, and eventually they would unify with Denmark through a personal union. By the mid 1400s, Sweden, through diplomacy and warfare, would install a relative of the Swedish king on the Norwegian throne, ending Anglo-Norway and making Sweden the mistress of the North. Due to not fighting the English for so long, France would centralize much earlier, with France becoming the most strongest European state by the 1300s. In the early 1500s, England and Scotland would formally unite, forming an alternative Great Britain, eventually including Wales and Ireland. With the discovery of the New World, the new English rival would be the Dutch, who they would fight several wars with in the Americas, India, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Now, this is England by the early modern period. This one battle has changed the world and English history so much, with English becoming unrecognizable, feudalism being introduced much later in England, the Anglo-French rivalry never happening, and Britain forming earlier. By the modern era, I predict that Great Britain would break apart, with England becoming a welfare state like the rest of Scandinavia, focusing on its citizens' well-being rather than wars of expansion and spreading its influence. Now, this is where I'll end the scenario. If you want me to continue it further down the line, please do tell me in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts down below. But for now, goodbye.